Okay, alright. Get back to this now. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. He's sulking, in other words. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it." So God knows that Cain is mad. Now he knows why Cain is mad too. Now he's asking Cain, "Why are you mad?" He knows why Cain is mad. It's the same thing. It's the reason why you ask a kid why a kid is sulking, even if you know the reason why the kid is sulking. But he's telling him to master his urge to sin. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, Cain, by the way, will not master his urge to sin. "Let's go out to the field." And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "You're a pest, cat. Stop this right now. Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." So God knew where Abel was. He didn't need Cain to tell him where Abel was. God knew where Abel was. "Now you are under a curse, and are driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand." The life of a creature is in the blood, by the way. So Abel's life is calling out to God from the ground. "When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Now the ground's already been cursed. It was cursed because of what Adam. It was cursed because of what Adam did back in Genesis 3. But now Cain is under, in addition to the original existing curse, Cain is now under his own special curse. "You'll be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." The Lord said to him, "Not so." I'm seeing a footnote here. The alternative reading is "very well." "If anyone kills Cain, he will suffer vengeance 7 times over." So you're not going to kill Cain. You're not going to get Cain out of his punishment easily by killing him, or by being mad at him. Like we're not going to allow a vengeance killing here. If they would have all been brothers and sisters at this point in time. However many of these people are supposed to be wandering around now at this point, they would have all been siblings. So some of them could have been friends, been close with Abel, and are mad at Cain for killing Abel. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who found him would kill him. I have no idea what this mark is, by the way. Does it even really matter? So Cain went out from the Lord. Now some people will tell you he made Cain black. Okay, that's another thing that we're going to see later on when Noah curses Canaan and Ham's son. Okay, there are some people who say this is where black people came from, and that is totally, and that, I don't know how many people still believe that today. I mean, that would have been something that would have been more common, especially the Canaan stuff, and we'll get to that when we get to that. That would have been more common, I think, back earlier in our history. I don't know how many people still believe that today, but that is totally ridiculous, and that's not what this mark is. I don't know what the mark is, but I can tell you that's not it. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, which just means wandering, east of Eden. Now, Eden itself was described initially as being in the east. Of course, we're talking about east from Israel. So somewhere east of Israel is where Eden is described as being. And Cain is being driven east from Eden. So he's going even farther east. To Israel's west, of course, is the Mediterranean Sea. To the north was Turkey. To To the south was Egypt, where they had come from, and to the east was a desert, actually. Desert, and Babylon is across the desert. Assyria comes from kind of the northeast from there. The enemies of Israel would get to Israel by going around the desert east of Israel and coming down from the north. Or if they're Egypt, they'd come up from the south. But the idea of going east means you're being driven away. And we're going to see that theme kind of again. You know, it's like, of course, you can't go west because that's where the sea is. So you go east and you're being driven out. There's a desert directly east of Israel, and to the east of that desert was Babylon, their greatest enemy in their history. So the idea of going east means that you're being driven away. So Eden is east of Israel, and Cain is being driven east of Eden even. So he's being driven away. Cain lay with his wife. Again, that would have been either his sister or his cousin, just some other person that Adam and Eve had given birth to, or Eve had given birth to, that we didn't read about. And she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Cain was then building a city. Now, he was supposed to be a wanderer. God himself said that he was supposed to be a restless wanderer on the earth, and punished him with wandering. Cain does not want to wander. He's here building a city. He's living in defiance even of God's punishment of him. And he named it after his son Enoch. That's going to be. We'll mention that again in a little bit. We're going to, that doesn't get developed very much here, but let's keep that idea in mind that Cain named his city after his son. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad was the father of Mahuhael, and Mahuhael was the father of Methushael, and Methushael was the father of Lamech. If you can't pronounce these words, you might as well have fun with them. Lamech married 2 women. So this is our first polygamist. Cain was our first murderer, and his descendant Lamech was the first polygamist. These are also the first city dwellers, by the way. I wonder if there's a connection there, huh? Lamech married 2 women, one named Ada and the other Zillah. Now you go far enough back and we're all cousins, okay, even true to this day. I don't know how many generations you have to go, but you go back far enough and you're going to find connections between just about all of us. That was true back then too. But keep in mind also that at this point in time, the gene pool would have been less diluted. Diseases would not have formed. Mutations in the DNA code would not have developed as much. Inter-family marriage and sexual relations would have been considerably safer than what we experience today. Ada gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all who play the harp and flute. Now, the harp and flute are not bad instruments just because they come from a bad family. David was a harpist and a flute player, or a lyre player. We're just stating where these things came from here. Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain's sister, I guess Zillah had a girl too, was Naamah. Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, listen to me. Wives of Lamech, hear my words. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. This means escalation, retribution. Someone's going to wound me, someone's going to insult me, someone's going to injure me, so I'm going to kill him. I'm going to inflict vengeance on him 7 times over. 77 times over. In fact, no one was supposed to kill Cain. I don't know if that means someone did. Is this an indication that Cain was murdered eventually? God said back here in verse 15 that if anyone kills Cain, he'll suffer vengeance 7 times over. Lamech says to here, In verse 24, Cain is avenged 7 times, and then Lamech 77 times. Is that a clue that Cain was eventually murdered by somebody? I don't know. At any rate, Lamech is taking God's curse on Cain and making his own little vow out of it, saying that I'm gonna kill someone who injured me, and no one's gonna get revenge on me. Keep that idea of vengeance and retribution and escalation of conflict in mind. We're going to come back to that later on. Adam, so going back to Adam now, lay with his wife again. And she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. Seth also had a son, and he named him Enosh. At that time, men began to call on the name of the Lord. So, let's think here about Cain and Abel. Well, really Cain. Abel is just the victim of the story. There's not a whole lot to think about when it comes to Abel. Now, whether or not you want to consider this story literal or having actually happened, that's beside the point. I'm not going to address that here. But let's think about this story and think about Cain and think about some of the things that we can infer from Cain, even if they're not stated here in the text. Okay, we read right away that Cain worked the soil. Now remember, I read a few verses before that, like right before that, we heard a curse from God about cursing the ground, saying that the ground is going to produce thorns and thistles. It's going to fight you. You're going to have to work for it. You're going to sweat for your food. Well, Cain would have experienced that. Cain working the soil and producing the fruits of the soil to feed himself and his family, he would have experienced that curse directly. He would have experienced the curse, the results of that curse firsthand. And he wasn't there when the curse was laid down. He would have heard about that from Adam and Eve, his mom and dad, at some point during his life. I don't know how long Cain lived or how old he was when this incident with Abel happened. I'm assuming he was an adult, however you define adulthood, with lifespans that span centuries. But I'm assuming he was an adult and was living on his own, or living as an adult, working the ground, feeding himself and his wife and his family, assuming he had a family at that time, and struggling to do so. He would have been fighting it. The ground would have been fighting him. He would have been having to deal with thorns and thistles and the sweat of his brow and all that. If his wife had had kids yet, she would have experienced pain in childbirth. I don't know if she had. Cat. But if so, she would have experienced it. He would have seen that. Or at the very least, he would have seen his mom experience pains in childbirth, because Eve was having kids. And he wasn't there for any of that. He wasn't there in the garden when they ate of the fruit of the tree and the ground was cursed and all these bad consequences of that happened. So you can just imagine him thinking as he's growing up, and as I don't know if he was their actual firstborn. I guess he was. We know they had other sons and daughters who aren't mentioned. The text will say that later in chapter 5. So was he the first, or is he just the first one who gets mentioned? I don't know. Presumably he was the first, because the firstborn gets the attention. But I don't know. We'll read about the fate of the firstborn throughout the book. It's kind of interesting. We'll read more about that as we go through the generations. Oh my goodness, of Genesis. What are you doing, Cat? Oh no, I do not like this at all. What are you doing? He was older than Abel, and he was of course older than Seth, who came along later, and they had other sons and daughters. So I just don't like what you're doing at all, Tugber. I just think that we're cruising for disaster here. Whoa. Yeah, you stay right there. This is actually kind of funny. There's the cat. You just stay right there. You don't do anything. You just hang on for dear life. That way you don't destroy anything. You're going to destroy something. I know you. I can see in your eyes you want to destroy something. You'll be disappointed if this day ends without you destroying something. Anyway, so Cain would have seen, at the very least, he would have experienced. He would have seen his mother experience pain in childbirth as she's having his brothers and sisters. And then he grows up. I don't know what Adam did. Did Adam work? Cat, you're annoying. Quit that. Quit that immediately. Did Adam work the soil too? I don't know. Probably. I'm assuming he did. I don't know. I guess it's some. Cat, I don't. Oh my goodness. Just calm down. I should have put them up before I started this today. Anyway, so he is out there every day breaking his back and sweating buckets trying to get enough food just to live, just to bring home and eat. And he's thinking to himself, if I bet, I just bet. Now the text doesn't actually say this, but I just bet that he's thinking to himself, if I had been in the garden instead of Dad, because Adam was his dad, I wouldn't have let Mom talk me into eating of that fruit. And you can just see that mindset, that thought, seep into him day after day after day over years. It's like, I'm not responsible for this. I'm not the reason why the ground is cursed. If Dad had if Dad had known better, he would have told Mom to stop eating of the fruit of the tree. If I were there, if I were in Dad's position, I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have fallen for it. I wouldn't have let Mom talk me into eating the fruit of the tree. And then I wouldn't be out here now having to deal with all this difficult stuff, all this difficulty. He never knew the pleasures of the garden before life got difficult. All he would have heard would have been what his mom and dad had told him, and he would be. I could so easily see him blaming them for his current struggles as he fights with the ground to produce food for him to eat. Now, does that directly factor into his rebellion, to his resentment towards Abel? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, Kat. Okay, you go over there. Yeah, that's good. Good, good. Abel may have been easier to accept this. Abel may have had the mindset where he accepted what it was, and he was working the flock. He kept the flock, and he offered sacrifices together. Again, we don't know how they knew to do that. The text is not interested in telling us how they knew to do that. The Israelites knew about fat portions and all that of sacrifices. We don't know how Cain and Abel knew about that. We just assume that they knew because the Israelites knew. Maybe Abel didn't have some of these issues. Maybe he didn't have some of these doubts or these complaints, these grumbles. Maybe he went about his business and offered his sacrifices and did not have a problem accepting God. Cain may have had a harder time with that. He may have heard those stories that his mom and dad had told them, and he may have blamed God for cursing the ground that Cain himself fights every day when he goes out to work the soil. He may have blamed, I believe he probably blamed his parents, just like Adam blamed Eve, and Adam also blamed God, and Eve blamed the serpent. I think Cain probably blamed his parents and God for the struggles that he himself experienced every day he went out to the field. And maybe Abel just didn't have those complaints. Maybe he didn't have those grumblings. Maybe he was just something that Abel just accepted and did not complain about. And so I think that makes it make more sense to me of how Cain was in a bad place, I believe, already, even before the incident with the offerings. The Bible doesn't often give us, the Old Testament in particular, often doesn't give us the whys behind the what. It says something happened or someone did something, and doesn't often provide the whys. Doesn't often tell us why this happened or why someone did something. It just doesn't. So we're often left guessing. We're often left assuming. The story of Cain and Abel doesn't really explain much about how this happened. It just gives us the basic facts. Now, it does say that Cain was angry at Abel, which I believe. But I also think it's easy if you put yourself in Cain's mindset and think about it from the perspective of someone who would have grown up directly experiencing the curse on the ground that we read about in Genesis 3. and knowing that his mom and dad were responsible for that, and he wasn't. I mean, he wasn't there for that. And just thinking how easy it would be then for him to project that blame onto them, and thinking, well, they're the reason why I'm having such a hard time going out and getting food from the fields. And if I had been in the garden, I wouldn't have let that happen. I've been hearing Dad tell me this story about the serpent tricking Mom, and then Mom convincing him, Dad, to eat of the fruit. I've been hearing that every night at bedtime since I was 2 or whatever. And if I had been there, if that had been me, I wouldn't have done it. And I think it's very easy then to see how that would factor into Cain's negative attitude, negative towards his parents, negative towards his brother, and negative towards God. Moving on.